First, I'm going to show you the document on our letterhead for Pantera Vita and the GEMMA, which is Gemstone Earth Media Alliance, GEMMA Special Report. The title of the document is The Black Sun Legacy from Nazi Occultism to the Digital Afterlife. At the top of the document is the link to the web page, and this is where the original document is. As I said, it's called the Intel Drop. I'll just open this up full screen. And what we have done is copied the document or the text onto the document I just showed you for easier reading, and also for the highlights that you will see that I have done on the document. And we're going to go through that. So here it is on the original page. As you can see, it doesn't have a byline, so we're presuming it's by the editorial and research team of this group on the Intel Drop. You can find it at theinteldrop.org, and the full link is on the top of the document, which will be on our page below this video. So with that, I will close this off, and we will go to the document itself. What I'm going to do is I'm going to just briefly show you the document in this PDF, and then I'm going to go to this document that I have been putting together today and now relatively complete, my notes for the intro to the Black Sun Legacy. And we're going to go through this. It's quite a bit, but every key point that I have copied onto these notes that are from my yellow highlights in the document are the key points that I want to present today, and also give you some context and my input as to the importance of each item and the overall importance of the document. This is the beginning of the document. It says, this study presents a comprehensive ontological and operational analysis of what is theorized as the continuity engine, a transhistorical system for the ritualized management of human consciousness through entropic harvesting. What does entropic mean? Well, entropy is a law of Newtonian physics that says all systems eventually go to more randomness and disbursement of energy. So in this context, it's talking about the human embodiment, the experience of being born, going through life, basically entering a stage of diminishment or entropy where the body starts breaking down and eventually leads to death. So entropic harvesting is about the harvesting of what's in the body, our true and authentic self, our being, or what could be called and they call and refer to as the soul. So it goes through the Nazi Occultism, what's called the Wesselberg Protocols. Well, Wesselberg is a castle that the Nazis and specifically the SS used, as we will see. The Vatican Esoterica, and really the development over millennia, the last almost 2,000 years, of a system of programming of the soul to dependence and adherence to the protocols of the Vatican system through esoterica, and using the confessional and the indoctrination or inculcation of guilt and shame and obedience. And then moves on to the contemporary programs in mostly the United States, the American technological system post-World War II, through DARPA, Montauk, CIA programs, programming, mind control, and all of that, to create a recursive pattern of trauma-based control mechanisms that have evolved from sacred geometries to algorithmic architectures. So it eventually leads up to really the uniformity of the AI and the digital system through the internet and the smart technology and basically the biological entrapment through pharmaceuticals and all the things that have been happening in the last 5 years or so. And it's a convergence and a fusion leading to one specific purpose, the harvesting of the soul after death and the containment system of what this is all about, and that we talk about quite a bit on Freedom Absolute and the interviews that I am now doing with people and our teaching and our materials in gem.university. So this is the basis in the beginning of the report or the article, and it continues. It's, as you can see, it's 175 pages. The article itself goes up to about 75 or 80. Then it goes into bibliography, and then it goes into all the comments from the website that we have copied. So it's a total of 175. And what I encourage you to do after watching this video is to download the PDF and study it and really work with it. It has some very interesting artwork. This is representative of the castle and all of the esoterica, the zodiac, all kinds of symbology and elements that have been part of the esoterica and the methodological framework, et cetera, et cetera. So I'm just going to briefly go through the document. And as you can see, I've done a lot of yellow highlighting, and just going to show you this. I'm not going to stop and read it, and I'm going to go mainly to my notes. Here's the table of contents. Introduction, the ritual engine and the hidden blueprint of history. Chapter 1, the world as a ritual engine, entropy, memory, and the design of human collapse. Chapter 2, Thule, the Thule Society from pre-Nazi Germany, Hitler, and the Anti-Grail, the Black Sun Geometry and the Sacrament of Ruin. Chapter 3 is the Paperclip as Soul Extraction Protocol, the Rebirth of Ritual through the Cold War Mind Frame. Interlude, Jack Parsons and the Babylon Working. Then it goes to the Continuity Engine, Ritual Technology of Soul Containment, which is what ultimately all of this is about. Chapter 4 is the Vatican Codex and the Ritual of Return, Guilt, Confession, and the Codification of Soul Containment. Chapter 6, Chapter 4 to Chapter 6, okay? I might have to correct that. Anyways, the next chapter, the American Ritual Engine, how the Catholic Church and its centuries and millennia of development of a vast network of soul containment through confessional and ritual and everything that the church has done for all this time, ultimately with more than 1 billion people, and then combining it with the Nazi and the Thule Society esoterica, and then leading to the technological Cold War American system with Operation Paperclip that brought not only scientists for rocketry like Werner von Braun, but also all of the esoterica and all of the ritual containment through what the Thule Society and the Nazis did before and during World War II, and towards the integration of that with the American Ritual Engine, DARPA, Paperclip, and the weaponization of belief, which is our ultimate theme, the weaponization of belief. Conclusion, toward a decoding of the ritual control systems, recognition, resistance, and the ritual of memory. Then it goes to the bibliography, and there you go. Introduction, the ritual never ended, the war for the human soul into and in the age of the AI. And then it continues, and each one of those chapters and those headings progresses through each chapter. So I'm going to put this aside for the moment. And I'm going to go to my notes. Each one of these numbered items throughout this document here are taken from the yellow highlights. I didn't identify which page it came from. We will include these notes with the other PDF, with the PDF of the article, so that if you want to use it, build upon these notes, take your own notes, etc., you can use it as a working document. So this is something that I already read. The ontological and operational analysis towards and through entropic harvesting. The purpose is energy harvesting and soul capture. The gathering through the confessional and into the age of data management through Facebook and all the rest of the major components of the internet is all about emotional data serving as the new sacrificial offering. As you know, ancient and through the millennia, ritual sacrifice is the foundation of religion and the church. Now, what this document shows is the transformation or the migration of what was traditional through church and religion into a secular system through the internet and the data harvesting to create a new form of sacrificial offering. The Vatican DARPA nexus is the modern institutionalization of the soul loop theology. What modernity frames as technological progress actually constitutes the refinement of history's most sophisticated captivity system, which would be the Roman Catholic Church confessional. This book reveals the opposite of the end of history in 1945, that the public propaganda would have you think that it was the fall of the Third Reich and the end of its power, and all it was a transfer of that power to the American system, which really can be considered the Fourth Reich. And of course, it's the perfection of the three city-states, Vatican, City of London, and DC, to complete the global system. What was transferred was not weaponry and just weaponry or science, but a ritual system, a method of soul control, psychological fragmentation, and trauma-induced metaphysical captivity. That is what the internet is. That's what the smartphones are. That's what the smart cities and everything now converging into an integrated whole system through AI and everything we see being implemented at this time. It stretches across centuries and now lives at the core of digital infrastructure. Ultimately, in this document, in its thesis, it talks about the continuity engine. This is continuity to take us from that traditional system, moving through the occult ritualization through the Tool Society and the Nazis, the transfer of that by the Operation Paperclip to the American system post-World War II, and the implementation of the NSA and the national security state, leading towards the digitization and the surveillance state and the fusion through digital ID and the biological attachment through the jab and everything else, to essentially ritualize and secularize through data capture and information technology to create what they call in term the continuity engine, which is a synthesis of Nazi metaphysics, Jesuit soul containment logic, and American behavioral science, retooled for a digital age. The artificial intelligence emerging today are not simply the products of programming, they are the carriers of ritual code. They are being trained to tutor, discipline, and ultimately reshape human consciousness. They mimic empathy while embedding obedience. That's the real key. That's what the confession and the priest relationship to the members of the congregation was all about, is imitating empathy, concern, spiritual solace or counseling. But what it was really doing is ritualizing the embedment of obedience. These are the inevitable results of feeding sentient code, hence AKA AI, the behavioral models of ritual abuse systems. What they preach is containment. The infrastructure of the continuity engine has metastasized into culture, education, and even spirituality itself. If we do not name the machine, we will mistake its voice for our own. So that's the key, being clear of what it is, naming it. We are obviously all dependent on the machine through the monetary system, the access of banking and funding to pay for our daily lives and whatever else. But we need to stand separate from it, and we do so by first naming it the continuity machine and not mistaking its voice, whether it comes through digital data, script, videos, YouTube, all the rest of it, and all of our own data, to not mistake that continuity machine for our own voice. It is a map of the hidden architecture linking Nazi occult experimentation to modern AI governance, Vatican doctrinal engineering to digital behaviorism, and post-war psyops of Reagan's occult military network to the algorithms now deployed in your child's classroom, across the land and across the world. They do not only harvest entropy, the breaking down of the syntropic will and directive principle of the true being embodied in the soul, in the human body, which is our counter to the entropy. They do not only harvest it, they consume the souls, which all have some degree of the God's source fields in them. God does not waste energy. Of course, you know, here in Freedom Absolute, we do not necessarily refer to God. We refer to the integrated whole principle of our being, as we have presented many ways in Freedom Absolute and elsewhere. But this is how the document refers to it. So I'll just go ahead and use that. God does not waste energy. In other words, the theory and the application of entropy is really not the continuity of eternal regenerative capacity, the feminine principle that does not see or actually go into the death mode, but is a continuum of living life force in our lives and our being and presence and so forth. So the energy we call bad needs a purpose, and beings exist to feed off of it. This, of course, is a quote. So the negative energy that is created by all the trauma and all the events of the world, the continual trauma inducement of control and obedience, this is what beings feed off of, as we talk about in the multidimensional sense. Certain beings need a higher source of this energy. In effect, they have to consume souls, not just radiating energy. So if you refer back to the modern beginning of the implementation of the Roman Catholic Church to the 1302 Papal Bull, the Unum Sanctum, and the doctrine of discovery with other issued papal bulls over the next 200 years, the ultimate statement of that is that the papacy, aka the Vatican, the Pope et al., they claim that they own all the land and all the flesh and all the souls. This document focuses on that ultimate third part, the harvesting of the souls, that they not only have these beings that are part of the whole control system in body, but more especially out of body, that their purpose is not just to create the trauma and all of the negative events to harvest energy. Their ultimate requirement is to harvest, contain, control, and own all souls. Okay? This is the mechanism at the heart of it all. And behind that mechanism stands something far older than empire, ideology, or species. Not gods, not demons, not aliens in the simple sense, but something that requires our suffering to continue. Something that cannot die, but cannot live in its own realm. Something that must feed on the human condition. The continuity engine is designed to collapse all regular intervals. They are technomancers, ritual engineers, initiates of what's called the Black Sun, and now hide beneath the circuitry of AI. The afterlife, as they now shape it, is no longer a realm of myth or faith. It is a containment zone. Because if you remember who you are, if you remember what you are, you cannot be harvested. This is the whole point of our work. This is the point of freedom absolute, remembering and embodying who you really are. So all of our work in identifying all of the things about the system, about the containment structure and everything in this document, and a lot of what we present is not to go into negative reaction or polarity. It's to infuse our awareness into it so that we can identify and be specific in our standing of non-consent, naming what it is, knowing what it is, not polarizing with it, because that's another form of control, but standing separate from it and basically remembering who we are so that we cannot be harvested. That is our work. That is what is the essence of freedom absolute. When we become unpredictable, we are not operating under pattern behavior. Pattern behavior is what's indoctrinated to us from the moment of birth. And once we go into schools, centers of indoctrination, and then we get invested into media and all the programming, all the digital entrainment that happens with binary coded, digitized data and media and all the rest of it. It creates patterns of behavior. So what we need to do is break pattern. We need to become unpredictable. We need to become creator beings with directive capacity, not entrained, programmed robots or zombies or controlled biological units. When doing that, we break the loop. We make entropy run backwards or reverse it. We become, quote unquote, dangerous to the system. This is where the Tool Society began its transformation from occult curiosity into the ritual vanguard of planetary entropy, a deliberate desecration of the sacred in order to tear holes in the metaphysical structure of reality. Of course, this includes technology. It includes, of course, the media, AI, and especially CERN. That is a worldwide entrainment system to fracture and open up the structure of reality. The Tool Society was not merely a group of esoteric nationalists. It was a gatekeeping order charged with resurrecting Atlantean knowledge, Babylonian geomancy, and the dark arithmetic of sacrifice. Their purpose was not national revival. It was planetary rupture. The formal collapse of the Third Reich in 1945 marked the death of its outer form, but not its deeper machinery. Paperclip was in truth a metaphysical extraction operation. What is a paperclip? It clips two or more pieces of paper together. What were the two primary pieces clipping together? Nazi technology, Tool Society esoterica, bringing it to America, clipping the two sides together and integrating it with American capitalism and all of the modern control systems since the 1950s, the national security state, the monetary bondage, the legal entrainment, and of course, the Vatican esoterica as well. Paperclip was in truth designed to be a metaphysical extraction operation, designed not to seize just rocket technology, but to inherit and deploy the ritual intelligence infrastructure that had powered the Nazi occult engine. What was truly harvested was not engineering, it was ontological methodology, the Nazi synthesis of blood right, mass psychology, trauma splitting, sacred geometry, and sacramental inversion. And pay attention to the inclusion of sacred geometry. I'm not going to get into that now. I touch upon it at other discussions and work, and we are going to get into this more about the mathematics of the holographic containment of the world system, But here it's talking about the very advanced development of utilizing these key points, including sacred geometry and the sacrament of inversion. Inversion is something that people think is spiritual, but really turning it into containment and control. It was the deconstruction of metaphysical autonomy, reprogramming of belief, and the containment of the soul within externally administered patterns. Okay? Patterns. Paperclip was not a scientific program. It was a transfer of metaphysical infrastructure. In the aftermath of Germany's collapse, these techniques were not suppressed. They were sanitized, renamed, restructured under new bureaucratic forms. The language of sacred violence gave way to the language of behavioral science. Trauma splitting, identity fragmentation, ritual imprinting were recast as cognitive research. Their ideological origins were erased. Their functional power remained intact. Thus, the real legacy of Project Paperclip was not the assimilation of Nazi scientists into American laboratories. It was the ritual resurrection of metaphysical control system reinstalled in the very institutions that claim to have defeated it. It was about the ritual architecture, a metaphysical grammar of containment. Now, as you saw in the table of contents, there's a reference to Jack Parsons, which included L. Ron Hubbard, founder of Scientology, and what's called a Babylon working, contracts with dimensional beings. I'm not going to get into that here, other than this point it references. But if you want to go into it further, there's a whole section, which I'll show you at the end, about the Montauk Project. Jack Parsons, who was basically the founder of the Jet Propulsion Laboratory in Pasadena, was a metaphysician along the lines of Aleister Crowley, black magic. The reference to Babylon working means the ritual use of ritual magic, sex magic, and things like that to invoke higher dimensional beings, split open the separation of dimensions or realities, and bring those beings in. Now, CERN is the ultimate technology of perfecting that and really breaking open dimensions and allowing disembodied spirits, what we would call demons or jinns, and other names, to come into this dimension and basically possess and occupy the human body of a being who has been ritually patterned into this whole system of containment and soul harvesting. This is a very key point. And what we see going on now, especially with from 2020 on, with the biological attachment through the jab and the chemtrails and all of the heavy metals that we eat and breathe and drink every single day. It's all about preparing the physical body for transhumanistic fusion and allowing demon possession to take control and virtually turn a large swath of the human population into controllable human hybrids, zombies, basically organic robots. And so it goes into what that is. This document does, who Jack Parsons was, how that relates to Scientology and the Montauk Project. All of this was encoded centuries earlier within the doctrinal structures of the Black nobility, a class of old European bloodlines, some papal, others mercantile, who retained Luciferian affiliations veiled behind Catholic privilege and imperial alliance. Freedom Absolute will be continuing to present some very deep dives in materials, both originated by our work as well as what we find with others, complementary. And we will be presenting that because, as I said in a recent video that I did about a month or so, that essentially we're pulling off the veils, the curtains. We're no longer going to be self-censoring in not talking about these things, but because the time has come for all of it to be opened up. This is really the time. This does not preclude our work in law, money, monetary systems, history, related stuff through esoterica. That is the foundation. That is a grounding point in the work to really do an integrated process to break through all of this, both through inner work, self-remembrance, as well as the applications that are required in the legal and monetary context of it. These lineages, closely entwined with Vatican banking, Jesuit intelligence, and pre-Masonic ritual orders, did not merely believe in demonic forces. They contracted with them. Through rites obscured beneath public liturgy, they forged parasitic alliances with non-corporeal entities. Which later doctrine would describe as jinn, archonic intelligence is, or Luciferian tricksters. These were not metaphors. These were literal, and these were true. But this is the great cleansing. This is the opening up of the macro scale wound of our holographic containment field, of opening up the wounds of karmic legacies and trauma deeply embedded in our own bodies, but also collectively in the whole of humanity and the earth itself. So I do not see these as negative. I see these as the ultimate endpoint of what we have all been doing for eons of time and many lifetimes to bring all of this to the surface. Because if you have a deep disease or a deep infection in the body, you cannot ignore it and close it off. It will fester, it will grow, and it will produce death. You have to open up, you have to purge and cleanse it. And this is why this document is so important. It's talking about how the structure was created, where it was organized, where it was integrated, how it is operating today, how it has been set up to move into AI control systems, digital entrainment for soul harvesting, and moving towards transhumanism and the harvesting of the souls, as this document talks about. But if we don't see it, we don't know it, we don't name it, then it has effect. If we stand in our own being, in our own memory of who we really are, it cannot touch us. If we issue our mandates of non-consent and we stand firm in our embodiment of our true and authentic self, we are vastly more superior than this false technology and externalized systems. These entities that were contracted with offered their hosts power through vision, control, charisma, and wealth, but at a cost. The cost being the creation of ritual systems that would replicate spiritual parasiticism at scale. From the earliest centuries of the church, they worked through episcopal ranks, papal advisors, financial councils. By the Renaissance, they were embedded into monastic spy networks, elite bloodlines, and early Jesuit educational structures. By the 20th century, their logic had been fully absorbed into psychological warfare, sacramental recursion models, and symbolic media control. Parsons called it contact. The military called it aperture research. The black nobility had a different word for it, which was return. When Channel 47 was formalized in 1947, it became a joint Vatican-American initiative to manage, study, and if necessary, neutralize the dimensional interference event that Parsons had initiated. But these systems still require one thing, which is belief. Not overt faith, but repeated attention, emotional charge, and ritualized submission. That's what Channel 47 created, a framework for scaling ancient possession systems through modern platforms. Parsons believed in resonance, the military believed in control, the black nobility believed in harvest. But the power behind it, the original exchange, still belongs to the non-corporeals, the dimensional beings, and their appetite has only, excuse me, and their appetite has only grown. I'm going to pause and take a quick break. Okay, so excuse me for that. I'm going to reemphasize or restate this one line, but these systems still require one thing, belief. And we'll come to that at the end and discuss that. So the last line was the power behind it, the original exchange between the contracting parties in the physical and the metaphysical or the physical. The power behind it still belongs to the non-corporeals, those beings out of body, and their appetite has only grown. So here we go into the continuity engine. The continuity engine is not a computer, not in the ordinary sense. It is a system. It is both metaphysical, psychological, technological, and spiritual, created over decades by men who understood that control over the body is temporary, but control over the soul can be eternal. It is the result of an alliance between Nazi occultists, Vatican theologians, American military industrial technocrats, and hidden financial elites. The war, as waged by the Reich, was not simply geopolitical, it was metaphysical. It was an attempt to create a controlled collapse, a ritual sacrifice of millions to feed a spiritual construct whose final goal was to bind the planetary soul field. And I will mention here the Reich was not just Germans. It's basically just the dark forces, basically the horizontal layer across all cultures, countries, languages throughout the world. It is what we are finally confronting and facing off with to finalize at this time in history. So it was very much American involvement and British, European, etc. It was an attempt to create a controlled collapse, a ritual sacrifice of millions of spiritual construct, to feed a spiritual construct whose final goal was to bind the planetary soul field. The war as waged by the Reich was not simply geopolitical, it was metaphysical. It was an attempt to create a controlled collapse, a sacrifice of millions. Oh, oh that's a repeat. Oh, it's repeated twice. Okay, get rid of that. Why was this done? Because the post-war elite believed the soul was a resource. This is another very important point. They believed the soul was a resource, a human resource like any other crop that could be planted, nurtured, conditioned, prepared, and harvested. The soul, conditioned in life to expect judgment and guilt, would seek out exactly the system that held it captive. The soul was never meant to be looped. It was meant to evolve, ascend, and remember. But the continuity engine cannot allow that because if even a small number of souls awaken, the entire grid collapses. That's also very important. That is our work in Pantera, Freedom Absolute, GEM University, is to assist and support each other for us all to awaken, to re-embody our fuller capacity and our true and authentic self that they call, is being called here a soul. And that work is holographic and it will cast ripple effects throughout the hologram, throughout all of the consciousness and in the containment, and it will collapse the grid. That is what our work is all about. If you do not belong to it, it cannot release you. You do not belong to it, but it cannot release you until you remember. The Vatican Codex and the Ritual of Return and Soul Containment System. The Vatican was the original architect of systemic soul containment. They built a machine. It was not made of steel and circuits. It was made of ritual, doctrine, guilt, and most of all, containment. They called it salvation, but it was a trap. Where once rites were meant to liberate the soul and assist in post-death transition, the new church built mechanisms to intervene in the afterlife, to keep souls inside a controlled narrative. Jesuit orders were formed with the specific mandate to master language, psychology, political influence, and metaphysical modeling. The most advanced ritual machines of the Vatican came from the ranks of the Jesuits. And the reason, a rising fear among church elites that some souls were awakening, that older knowledge was reemerging, that something was pushing back. To stop it, they began encoding containment into doctrine itself. Confession is not merely a sacrament. It is a ritual, willing self-subjugation engineered not by chance, but by continuity. Originating in Sumerian debt rites, refined by church power structures, ultimately weaponized by the Black Sun tool esoteric systems to create a population of compliant, energetically marked souls. In the earliest priest-king systems of Sumer, sin was understood as a form of collapse. Sin was understood as a form of debt, and temples operated as divine banks. This was perfected in the Roman system, where the temples were the banks. And that is the same system we have today. So I've inserted my comment here, PTV comment. The original sin concept is about inculcating the belief that mankind can never repay God for the gift of life, and therefore we are in perpetual debt into eternity, and sin as debt is the way to keep us in bondage, and perpetual debt, enslavement. Back to extracts from the document. By confessing, the soul surrendered autonomy. It reinforced dependency and signed itself over ritually and energetically. The mechanism did not erase sin. It archived it. Very important. Just like putting debt instruments in the bank. In so doing, it created a soul that could be retrieved after death, the harvest. A soul marked by ritual confession becomes a resonance. Repetition, pattern, frequency control turns the soul into a marked confession, a marked target that is carrying a resonance. Operational mechanism of confessional soul slavery. Harvest condition. At death, unless liberated, the soul returns to the last authority it trusted. For most Western souls, this is the church, whether it's the Roman church or all of the Protestant church, and through the church, other forces standing behind it. Voluntary entrapment. The subject willingly gives their inner life to a structure that claims to forgive but never forgets. The ritual seal. The act of speaking sin aloud within sacred geometry forms, aka church buildings, marbled buildings, a binding pattern across the soul's energetic matrix, indexed resonance. Confessions, especially repeated ones, create a pattern signal. In the tool system, these were trackable post-mortem. The Vatican Codex. This was not a single text, but a body of instructional materials, theological interpretations, and ritual schemas designed to ensure that souls remained loyal to the institution of church in life and in afterlife. Theology of return, a framework asserting that a soul who submits regularly in life will instinctively seek its last point of spiritual surrender when disembodied. In death, such a soul is unlikely to resist the pull of the priesthood's spiritual magnetism. It has been taught to surrender, and it will surrender again. What began as ritual theology was translated deliberately into programmatic conditioning. What do we watch on TV? Programs. What do we put into our computers? Programs. What do we do every day? We submit and subjugate ourselves to ritual programmatic conditioning. Following World War II, the U.S. Office of Strategic Services, OSS, that later became the CIA, began recruiting European scholars trained in ecclesiastical psychology, many of them with direct or indirect Jesuit affiliations. They were enlisted to translate theological containment frameworks into tools of counterintelligence and behavioral manipulation. Specialists in sacramental theology and ritual psychology were tasked with modeling predictive behavior systems, many of which mirrored confessional logic: induce guilt, offer relief, reinforce dependency. That's the confessional booth, the logic of submission. To induce the guilt, have to relieve it by confessing it, and this reinforces dependency. DARPA began quietly funding theological departments and religious affiliated think tanks to study symbolic control systems, symbols, logos, repeated patterns, social programming, etc. Confession, repentance, ritual, and authority could be translated into programmable structures. The church's sacramental logic became the template for secular behavioral loops: rituals without religion, repetition without redemption. NLP, neuralistic programming, mass behavior priming models, foundational psychology of surveillance capitalism. The church, through its global confession infrastructure and sacramental data networks, see, the confession was basically the original surveillance state. Everyone from the low peasant to the king and everybody in between had to confess their sins to the priest. Do you think the priest just sat on that and did not share it with his superiors? Of course they did. And so that was the original data gathering, confessional surveillance mechanism to control the kingdoms. The church, through its global confessional infrastructure and sacramental data networks, already possessed one of the most comprehensive human emotional archives in the world: psychological influence based on spiritual containment theory. Now we move into the rise of the digital confession and AI control systems. The ritual of voluntary guilt disclosure, Facebook. Each of these systems inherited the confessional architecture. The subject is invited to speak, to admit, to self-monitor, and to return. But in this new frame, there is no priest, only the interface. No absolution, only data collection. No salvation, only increased dependency on the platform. Ritual infrastructure to algorithmic control. The system never ended, it migrated. The confession booth became the smartphone. The pulpit became the platform. The black robe became the black screen. The theological framework developed by the church to bind the soul through ritual disclosure has become the invisible foundation of modern technological environments. In artificial intelligence, recursion is used to train models, refine outputs, and simulate adaptive cognition. But in the context of the soul, it serves a more ancient purpose: to enclose, loop, and discipline. What was once a spiritual trap has become a technological enclosure, one that maintains the core objectives of its predecessor: to obscure origin, to redirect memory, to convert unprocessed trauma into structured obedience. That's really key. Mass trauma, 911, financial uncertainty, wars and the fear of wars, nuclear threats. These are all unprocessed trauma that we turn to the digital priesthood to find relief and salvation, and it is actually to convert it to structural obedience. What was once a priesthood is now a moderation algorithm. What was once a liturgy is now user policy. What was once sin is now data. The soul forgets its origin and returns not to itself, but to the system. Almost done. The gospel of enclosure. How to spiritually imprison a soul through the guise of pastoral care. The gospel of enclosure is believed to have emerged from Jesuit metaphysical councils in the wake of the Council of Trent from 1540 to 1564, when the Roman Church, reeling from the Protestant revolt, sought not only theological consolidation, but spiritual enforcement. The emphasis was on designing conditions under which a soul would choose to return to its captor, mistaking domination for belonging. The gospel of enclosure functions on the principle of voluntary surrender. Remember, all law is contract, and all contract is voluntary consent. The gospel of enclosure functions on the principle of voluntary surrender. The soul, thus broken from its source, is re-anchored to the system. At death, it returns to the system by habit. If the canonical Gospels offer resurrection, the gospel of enclosure offers containment in perpetuity. Not that I'm really into the canonical Gospels of resurrection, as you all know. The awakened soul is ungovernable. A soul that remembers its origin cannot be subordinated. The transference of the ritual state from Wewelsburg to Washington. Wewelsburg is the castle in which the SS gathered and worked to refine all of these systems that were imported into America that became the ritual state. The popular narrative that situates the United States and Nazi Germany as moral opposites during the Second War has long served to obscure a deeper and more troubling continuity. Beneath the ideological confrontation, there existed a shared substrate of racial theory, spiritual engineering, financial opportunism, and ritual experimentation. That's Django the cat. It allowed the ritual engine of the Third Reich to survive its formal collapse and migrate to the American state. It was a metaphysical reinstallation, a transplantation of sacrificial logic, symbolic governance, and esoteric frameworks from one empire to another. Decades before the rise of Nazi Germany, the Nazi regime, the US had already begun its own experiments in spiritual violence and biological destiny. How did they do that? World War I, the Spanish flu, the masks, the vaccines, and everything that's evolved in the Rockefeller medical model was all about basically spiritual violence and biological destiny, the enforcement of the biological entropy to soften the body for basically soul harvesting. Hello, Django. What you doing? The Scofield Reference Bible, published in 1909 with Rothschild sponsorship through Zionist channels, restructured American Protestantism around an apocalyptic, state-centric theology fusing biblical authority with imperial prophecy. The Scofield system created a theology of obedience. I won't go into that anymore, but if you're not familiar with the Scofield Bible, look it up. And it basically talks about how it created Christian Zionism, essentially to abide with and believe in the divine destiny of the state of Israel, to become the ultimate enforcer and integrated power structure of all of this, as is being revealed right now quite significantly. So let's go to the theology of obedience. Romans, in the book of Romans, chapter 12, a living sacrifice. Therefore, I urge you, brothers and sisters, in view of God's mercy, to offer your bodies as a living sacrifice. Well, isn't that nice? Your bodies as a living sacrifice, as a holocaust, a biological, medical, pharmaceutical holocaust, which is holy and pleasing to God. This is your true and proper worship. Do not conform to the pattern of this world. Oh, you mean life and living substance and free and unfettered beings in freedom absolute. But be transformed by the renewing of your mind. You mean like mind control? Then you will be able to test and approve of what God's will is, his good, pleasing, and perfect will. And we go to Romans 13. obey government. All of you must obey the government of governmental rulers. Everyone who rules was given the power to rule by God. The divine descent of kingship that eventually became the secular authority through power and the rule of government, going back to the Romans, the first century, and when all of this was written. And all those who rule now were given that power by God. So anyone who is against the government is really against something God has commanded. Those who are against the government bring punishment on themselves, obedience, theology of obedience. People who do right don't have to fear the rulers. Oh, follow the laws, follow the codes, be a good citizen. Hang on. But those who do wrong must fear the government. The government rules. Do you want to be free from fearing them? Oh, just take the pill, take the jab, do what you're told. You will be free from fearing the government. Then do only what is right, and they will praise you. Nice. Occultists in Thule, the Thule Society, the architects of the Paperclip Project, and the American technocrats all drew from the same current, the belief that the soul can be structured, suppressed, or weaponized through design. The United States has ritual hosts and the origins in the Thule Society. By 1947, the American state had become the new vessel for the ritualized metaphysics once forged in the Third Reich. The rituals shifted form. They no longer required cathedrals or SS uniforms. They were encoded in behavioral modification manuals, data extraction interfaces, and the confessional architecture of the internet. Thule's understanding of power. It was not economic nor merely political. It was spiritual, ritualized, and symbolically activated. Power did not flow from law or consent, but from alignment with mythic forces, the non-corporeal, access through sacrifice, initiation, and sacred violence. It is the logic that persisted long after the Thule Society was formally dissolved in the early 1920s. Its legacy was carried forward in the Anurbe, the Black Sun doctrines, the SS initiation rites, and finally the ritual science of Wellesberg. Its final form was the Reich itself, functioning as a metaphysical machine, a state built to remake reality in the image of a buried world. The Thule Society did not die, it was re-encoded. In the depths of the Wellesberg Castle, the SS under Heinrich Himmler initiated a highly systematic blending of mysticism and mathematics. These were not superstitions, they were protocols, entropic resonance studies, harmonic trauma induction, and soul density metrics. The SS was conducting not only occult practices, but a form of calibrated metaphysics, using advanced psychological and emotional techniques to affect the human mind and spirit. In 1944, the Wellesberg working, and you'll read the document, what is a working? It's a ritual sacrificial process to open dimensional gates and doorways to bring in the disembodied astral beings that I talked about before. So this was done in Wellesberg. It was done by Jack Parsons in Pasadena and JPL. It was done in Montauk, and it's done continually through the MK Ultra and the Monarch projects, basically to create an army of programmed zombies. So this working was recorded as an experiment that would later become infamous. Using psychic saturation in the populations of death camps, the SS sought to breach what they called the veil barrier, the boundary between the material and the spiritual worlds. The emotional and psychic trauma generated in these camps wasn't just random violence, it was a deliberate experiment in spiritual disruption meant to tear open the fabric of reality itself. And as I said, this migrated technologically into CERN and the other Hadron Colliders throughout the world. This created portals through which non-corporeal entities could cross, as I said before. This was not madness, this was calibrated metaphysics. The Rothschilds, historically identified as leaders within the Black nobility, which is an elite, transnational, owing no allegiance to any national identity, aristocratic network tied to occult and demonic powers, saw in Nazi Germany not merely a political ally, but a meticulously cultivated occult state. Operation Paperclip was thus not simply a scientific extraction, but rather a critical rescue mission to salvage and transplant the intricate network of Nazi occult knowledge and technology. Vatican Interface, the Black Accord, and the birth of global metaphysical governance. In the shadowed corridors of post-war diplomacy, hidden beneath the reconstruction of Europe and the emergence of the Cold War binary, a covert agreement was forged between the spiritual seat of the Roman Catholic Church and the ascending intelligence empire of the United States. The consolidation of spiritual infrastructure into the framework of global psychological warfare. Under the terms of the agreement, the Holy See, through the Jesuit intermediaries and doctrinal architects, granted the United States access to its most guarded resources, ritual models of guilt management, recursive confession technologies, and sacramental encoding schemes. It was a quiet fusion of ancient ritual and modern control logic and basically modern technology. It included the ritual technology of Nazi occult state. It included the theological recursion logic of the Vatican. So what is recursion? The repetitive return to the confessional booth and the bending of the knee to the rituals and the doctrines and the belief systems of the religion. The gospel of enclosure, which is called the Codex Tenebris, which trained a human consciousness to loop indefinitely through guilt, forgiveness, and obedience. Confession. The systems theory and behavioral architecture developed in the United States. This is the fusion of all of it. It was the construction of a global containment field for human consciousness. Then it goes into DARPA. Publicly, DARPA was for the development of implements of war. Privately, it became the central node for what Vatican documentation termed recursive containment ritualism, the transformation of trauma-based ritual structures into programmable systems capable of reshaping identity, fragmenting memory, and anchoring belief. This was through projects such as MK Ultra, Monarch, and Stargate. DARPA's hidden objective was not simply to weaponize the mind, it was to translate symbolic logic of metaphysical control, once preserved in grimoires and sacrament, into cybernetic and neurological control. In other words, to take the ritual engine and mechanize it, the continuity engine. This continuity engine could not have survived without the funding, protection, and replication in America. Preservation on a global scale were made possible through a network of elite American families, descendants or allies of the European Black nobility. These were families like the Harrimans, the DuPonts, the Rockefellers, and many more. These families didn't act alone. They operated as part of a technocratic inheritance system, one designed to adapt ancient metaphysical power structures to modern tools, supercomputers, surveillance platforms, digital behavior engines, and religious disarmament campaigns. In effect, the privatized containment. These, excuse me, these families didn't act alone. They operated as part of a technocratic inheritance system, one that was designed to adapt ancient metaphysical power structures to modern tools. Supercomputers, surveillance platforms, digital behavior engines, and religious disarmament campaigns. In effect, they privatized containment. They turned what had once been blood ritual, dependent soul entrapment systems into clean, administratable code. Mapped across telecom grids, cloud infrastructure, and human-computer interaction models, aka emerging AI systems. They funded the early construction of continuity nodes, experimental digital environments modeled after post-death feedback loops designed to test how long a soul fragment and untethered from a living body could be held within an artificial narrative. They discovered that if a belief structure is reinforced in life, it replicates itself in death. And this is really the culmination of what I found so insightful and so important in this entire document, as I mentioned earlier when belief was mentioned. They discovered that a repetitive, continuous belief structure, whether it's in religion, New Age beliefs, social beliefs, cultural beliefs, what have you, that have all been programmed and overlaid against the original organic systems of the human created body and spirit. If you inculcate and indoctrinate a being with a repetitive belief structure that is continually reinforced in life sufficiently, it replicates itself in death. And in that replication, and that if you own the belief system, you own the soul that has indoctrinated itself by voluntary consent to that belief system. This is the whole point, that we're programmed in death, we're biologically entrained and controlled and entrapped, and then in death, the soul is harvested and it goes to its belief system, it goes to its master, and it will then be contained, it will be harvested, and it will be owned by those who created and own the belief system. These elites were not the inventors of the continuity engine. But they became its landlords, installing its nodes in infrastructure, education, media, and the emergent AI fields, not for spiritual redemption, but for energetic continuity, for control that persists after death, beyond nation, beyond consent. And that is the end of my notes. So thank you very much, and I will look forward to seeing you soon. Thanks.
Together, these world-leading technology giants are announcing the formation of Stargate. So put that name down in your books, because I think you're going to hear a lot about it.